I want to welcome here old friends, and I have a lot of old friends here from many conferences, going back 20 years even, but also new friends. And actually we have 17 countries represented here today, which is fantastic. From the US, Israel, Eastern Europe, practically I think 11 or 12 European countries. I want to welcome my colleagues from the European Network of Housing Researchers, that enormous collection of housing researchers across Europe, numbering thousands. And we have a particular grouping called the Legal Aspects of Housing, Land and Planning. You know, we spent a lot of time trying to create the title of that group. And its convener, Professor Sergio Nassar-Aznar, is here and will be the first speaker this morning. I also want to welcome my colleagues from FIANSA, the European Federation of Homeless Organisations, who do enormous work in advocating for housing rights, alongside Housing Rights Watch, which is another huge network across Europe of lawyers and academics committed to the protection, promotion, and fulfilment of the right to housing for all. I want to welcome my colleagues here from UK and Northern Ireland universities and practitioners, as well as those who research and work in housing. We are grateful for the distinguished panel of speakers, 10 altogether, who have given their time for free to come here to Galway to impart to us their knowledge and expertise. And we're particularly grateful, recognizing the distances that are involved. And it's quicker now, but it's still 3 hours from Dublin on the bus. It used to be 4.5 hours. Let me announce also that we are in the process of creating a Centre for Housing Law, Rights and Policy here in the university, which will act as a resource for all of you and others who want to develop housing research, housing policy and lawmaking, and advocacy for housing rights. A special edition of the International Journal of the Law of the Built Environment will be produced based on papers in this conference, as will a book to be published by Hart later this year based on papers. So I would urge all of you who haven't submitted your papers to do so as quickly as possible so we can put them forward for peer review. In addition, FIANSA and Housing Rights Watch will also publish a selection of papers relating to housing rights and homelessness from the conference. The conference program brings here 2 days of people participating, presenting papers, discussing, networking, and hopefully enjoying themselves. We have state-of-the-art presentations by researchers across Europe. These are divided into streams. Now, you will find a lot of analogies with water here. And any of you who walk around Galway will probably understand. We have water from high and from low and from each side. So we have no problem talking about streams here. So we've decided to create 6 streams of presenters. And I hope it doesn't confuse you too much, but we have produced a schedule of the streams, which I would ask you to have a look at this morning as we go through and try and decide which ones you'd like to go to. If it's the case that there is an absolute surge of interest in 1 or 2 speakers, we will ask them to repeat. We have slots available for repetition. So you should be able to go. We also have a book of abstracts in your pack with the email addresses of all the presenters. So you can, if you don't see them, send them an email and hopefully they might send you their paper, probably in PDF. Of course, some of the speakers are very good. Some of the speakers are very funny, and all of the speakers will be enjoyable. The idea of streams, then, merging into what we would say a torrent, is if you look around the city, you will see, as you walk around Galway, I hope, in the next few days, you will see we have a main river called the Corrib. We have lots of little canals which flow in and around, and they all come together and flow into the sea in a torrent. And that's a little bit the imagery we're thinking will happen from here. A torrent of housing knowledge will develop. But if you do walk around the city, you will look across and you will see something called the Claddagh. It's the other side of the bay, not the bay, let's say, the other side of the Corrib. And that was the original village of the native fishermen who fished Galway Bay, because Galway Bay was a very important natural resource. You may know that the city was a Norman city, a walled city. And that area where is now called Spanish Arch was where the fishermen came to sell their fish every morning, and then they were exited from the city by the evening, and the gates were locked. So we also know this Norman city has links with France, with Spain, with North Africa. We even have a boat here called the Galway Hooker, not to be confused with other kinds of boats. And this boat has one very big sail. It's based on a boat which is only seen in the Eastern Mediterranean, the only other place. So we have a lot of international links in Galway. The university is very much international focused. So therefore, it is a good place and it is a good time to have an international housing conference and to host it here. The world financial system, we read, is in the papers. It's on all your television channels. But very, very rarely do commentators grasp the central role of housing in the world financial crisis. Housing is rarely seen as a focal point of policies, but as a means of achieving other goals. We have lots of commentators talking about housing policies as a means of social stability, of political support, of the expansion of property ownership or the construction industry, a place for new technologies, a place for consumer demand, expansion of the economy through housing, financial investment. We have also seen housing, and particularly social housing, as a means of the control of unrest, or indeed concern for human rights. And policy, therefore, housing plays a major role in policy in lots of other areas. The great Corbusier said that a house is a machine for living in. He was an architect. But he also said, of course, that the home should be the treasure chest of living. So we have all of these different views on housing, but we don't have really an awful lot of focus on housing itself, only as a means to something else. And in this conference, then, eminent speakers will speak on all these issues, all these aspects of housing law and policy. But at this moment in time, historically, we who talk about housing are challenged because there is a general skepticism of housing policies around the world. We know that the current crisis, based on the collapse of the housing boom, which itself was fueled by reckless lending by and large, this touches everyone. The tide of international finance has flowed into every city in the world. It has created unaffordable housing. It has created enormous land prices. It has stratified the housing systems in practically all of the cities of the world, creating major inequality and affecting the life chances of generations of people to come. In situations of homelessness and inadequate housing, and particularly the absence of housing for people with disabilities to enjoy independent living, this housing situation impedes and obstructs the full development of people and families. The residual market model of social housing is, in many places, failing to meet the international housing rights obligations which states have accepted. The once exalted asset-based welfare, where people were expected to achieve a level of assets in their lifetimes to pay for their care in later life, is no more. It's a dream of another age. Housing as a repository of wealth, as a nest egg, or as a valuable inheritance, is no more in many cases. Negative equity is not now just a personal problem, but one which global markets follow with great interest to ensure that their investments are going to be rewarded. Housing, then, is at the center of a global social and economic crisis. It is a central issue in the political landscape as governments struggle to reconcile the imperatives of international finance on the one hand and housing as a home, as a right, as a place for the development of people and communities on the other. Regulatory deficiency, complete failure of regulation following the neutering of the US Glass-Steagall Act spread across the globe, creating financial instability, especially in house lending. Yet critics of this debacle, as we can call it, are often accused of promoting an ideology. And I think we should talk a little bit about an ideology because we don't want to have to discuss it again. What is an ideology? Well, some of the icons of the earlier times of free and unregulated markets have recently professed that they did have an ideology. No less an iconic figure than Alan Greenspan, when questioned by a US Congressional Committee on what happened, Alan? He said, they asked him, did you have an ideology? And he said, yes. He said, remember what an ideology is. It is a conceptual framework for the way people deal with reality. Everybody has one. You have to. To exist, you need an ideology. The question is whether it is accurate or not. What I am saying, yes, I have an ideology, but I found a flaw. I don't know how temporary or permanent it is. It's a flaw in the model I perceive as the critical structure that defines how the world works. So, a very honest man was prepared to say there was a flaw in his ideology. The problem, of course, is that a lot of people are affected by that. But he is not afraid to admit that there is an ideological perspective to things. So the question is, why are we so hesitant to put forward a housing ideology? Maybe this ideology, which dare not speak its name, might talk about housing as a base, a home, a foundation for participation in community, family, and society. Maybe it recognizes that personal status, identity, and opportunities in life are largely shaped by housing circumstances. Yet these person-centered ideologies of housing and home have yet to find their place in legal systems. Law itself is predominantly associated with the protection of property and has traditionally viewed housing as a property law issue. Indeed, the idea of housing as property acts as a major barrier to free discussion on housing in legal circles. As David Henry Thoreau pointed out, our houses are such unwieldy property that we are often imprisoned rather than housed by them. Now, ideologically, I think he spoke more than anything else. However, we still feel that law and housing rights, particularly, can play an important role in the development of housing systems. It can provide a source of values which can impact on policies and on the market. It can draw on international precedents and jurisprudence and examples from other countries to inform and expand the conceptual framework with which we discuss housing systems. Indeed, the rational legal liberalist model of housing and property law is proving inadequate now to develop the kind of housing systems that people expect to see. In many ways, the current housing and financial crisis has exposed the weakness of the liberal pluralist model of the state. The role of the state in the context of enormous pressures from global private and public institutions must be to protect citizens and others. One of the elements of that armory must be housing rights, and indeed consumer rights. In this conference, then, over the next 2 days, we will endeavour to create a space for a free discussion, an open discussion, a debate on housing issues. Our president, Michael D. Higgins, who, as many of you know, comes from Galway, has pointed out that universities themselves have to face a challenge. He said, "Intellectuals are challenged, I believe, to a moral choice, to drift into, to be part of, a consensus that accepts a failed paradigm of life and economy, or to offer or seek to recover the possibility of alternative futures." So that's the challenge we have here in this next 2 days, where we have 40 researchers, 10 very highly prestigious speakers who will address issues on all aspects of housing. And this is where I'm going to end.